Hello again, and welcome to another exciting episode of Social Studies. We are back on the road to Civil War, part 2 here, and we're going to get started without further ado. So here we go. We are on this timeline. As you know, in part 1, we covered up to and including the Missouri Compromise. Remember, Missouri Compromise is when Missouri joined the Union as a slave state. They broke Maine off of Massachusetts to create another free state to keep that balance. Slavery going forward was outlawed in all territories north of the 3630 latitude line, which is known as the Missouri Compromise line. That's the southern border of Missouri. That's the Missouri Compromise. That was last time. Now, the Missouri Compromise kept the peace for quite a while until 1850, when there's going to be another problem. And during this time period, there was Manifest Destiny. I should play the song for you, but no, I'm not going to sing anymore either. Anyways, the United States is expanding westward. So, whereas in 1820, the border of the United States ended right here, and all of this grayish brown was Mexico, we're going to move on. And after the annexation of Texas, the Mexican War, and the Mexican Cession, all of a sudden the United States has gained all this new land. And there's going to be debates about whether slavery should exist in it or not. The Wilmot Proviso was a plan that would have outlawed slavery in all of the Mexican Cession land. Now, this was proposed even before we acquired the Mexican Cession land. It was voted down in Congress. It passed in the House of Representatives, voted down in the Senate. It really gets the southern slave states angry here. The southern slave states are angry because they think that these northern free states and the federal government are trying to destroy their way of life and their right to own other people. Now, even though it doesn't pass, it kind of drives this wedge between the North and the South, that Wilmot Proviso. All right. Moving on, they have a long time to worry about this problem because when they acquire the Mexican Cession, there really aren't all that many people living there. And they figure, oh, we have a long time before anywhere is ready to become a state. Little did they know, of course, about the upcoming gold rush, the 49ers. In 1849, all the thousands and thousands of people rushed to California, and by 1850, California is ready to become a state, and it wants to join as a free state. This would tip the balance. Now, in order to do that, they need the approval of some southern states, and the southern states aren't going to go for that because they don't want to tip the balance. So it's going to take another compromise. Once again, Henry Clay is going to be one of the people involved in this compromise of 1850. And what they're going to do is also going to involve banning the slave trade in Washington, D.C., which we talked about a little in school, or we will. It's also going to, so California is admitted as a free state. Slave trade is banned in Washington, D.C. The rest of that territory, they're going to use popular sovereignty. That means voting will be used to settle the slavery issue in the rest of the Mexican Cession lands. So just to back up for 1 second, too far. This area right here, once there are enough people living in any of these pieces in order to become a state, then the people who live out there will vote, whether to be slave or free. All right, that's called popular sovereignty. And finally, Congress also is going to pass a new law, a new tough Fugitive Slave Act, which will make it harder to escape from slavery. The Fugitive Slave Act, we also talked about briefly in school, or will talk about it briefly in school, passed only because of the Compromise of 1850. That's why the northern states went for this, even though it was something that people in the North really were against. It makes it easier to capture fugitive slaves. Fugitive, of course, means like on the run, people escaping. Made it illegal to help people escape from slavery. And now the Underground Railroad is going to have to make it into Canada if you were planning to escape, because you are no longer safe in the northern states. All right. You could pause here for a second. If you did not get all of those notes, make sure you go back and you fill in the Compromise of 1850 and the Fugitive Slave Act while I wait. All right, I'm done waiting. I am moving on. Hopefully you paused. So the Fugitive Slave Act leads to slave catchers catching people escaping from slavery. It really brings the battles of slavery right into the North, where people maybe could have ignored it before, but now when people, neighbors, employees, etc., are being captured and taken away, it really makes the abolition movement kind of grow, become a little more powerful, a little more listened to, perhaps. And the Underground Railroad is also going to have to become more active in this time period. Frederick Douglass, we talked about, and Harriet Tubman, we will talk about. Harriet Tubman is most associated with the Underground Railroad. She did many things, but the thing she's most famous for is escaping from slavery herself, and then instead of just playing it safe, returning many times to help other people escape as well, risking her own life. All right, now this Underground Railroad was not really a railroad. It was not really underground, and it wasn't really a trail. It wasn't just in one place. These are some of the more common routes that people may have taken to escape. But there's not one trail, there's not one way of doing it. Different people went different ways. These are just some of the more heavily traveled ways that you might imagine because of where roads were, because of the Erie Canal. So you can see where Canandaigua is. People might come through here on their way to the Erie Canal to Buffalo so they could escape into Canada. But there's not any one route. All right, just to remind yourself here, it was not a train. The Underground Railroad was not a train. It was not literally underground. It wasn't a path. It wasn't a trail. It wasn't a tunnel. It was basically this: people who helped other people escape from slavery. Sometimes in some places it was organized, sometimes it was not. It was just kind of people helping people. All right, moving on a little bit further down our timeline, we're going to talk about the Uncle Tom's Cabin and the Kansas-Nebraska Act coming up next. So, Uncle Tom's Cabin is a book written by this woman, Harriet Beecher Stowe, becomes this worldwide, well, especially in America, this best-selling book, a little bit like Thomas Paine's Common Sense. It's a book everybody reads, everybody's talking about, and it's really changing people's thinking. People in the North read this story, and it is a fictional story of a fictional family of people who are enslaved, but they start to realize that these are human beings that are being enslaved. These aren't just, these are people who have feelings, emotions, lives of their own, and it really makes people start to decide that really slavery can't be tolerated any longer, that they has to be abolished. Um, so people's feelings in the North and South are becoming a little more intense and a little more suspicious of one another. And this is going to bring us to 1854, something called the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Now, it involves building a railroad, a transcontinental railroad. This means across the continent, a railroad that will go across the continent. Now, it won't actually get completed until 1869 after the Civil War. So it takes about 15 years from when the time we're talking. But there's basically going to be two possible routes that this could take. There's the northern route from Chicago across this territory, or a southern route starting in New Orleans and traveling across. Some of you might remember the Gadsden Purchase, and some of you may love the Gadsden Purchase, but some of you may not have even heard of the Gadsden Purchase, depending on your views of various treaties and things like that. You don't need to know the Gadsden Purchase. But what does this have to do with anything? All right, well, to decide which route they're going to take, the government is going to either select the northern route here or the southern route. They have a committee in the United States Senate, and the northern representative is this guy, Stephen Douglas. Stephen Douglas, you should hopefully know from a previous video, was the Little Giant, the man who, not to be confused with Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass, of course, has two S's in his name, and he lived in Rochester, whereas Stephen Douglas has one S and lived in Canandaigua, at least for a while, both of them. All right, Stephen Douglas, remember that he wants popular sovereignty. He thinks the solution to everything is let the people vote on it. Not all the people, of course. Let the white people, the white male people, vote on it, and they can decide the slavery issue once and for all. Not the federal government. This should be a state decision, a local decision. He's kind of a states' rights guy, kind of a smaller, less powerful federal government guy. Remember that whenever you think Stephen Douglas, think popular sovereignty, and of course, think Canandaigua Academy. All right, so Kansas-Nebraska Act. He wants it to go through the north. He is from Illinois by this point, Chicago right here. He wants it to start here and go through the north. To get the southern states to agree to that, he agrees to expand popular sovereignty. Remember, in the Compromise of 1850, they were going to use popular sovereignty in this area, the rest of the Mexican cession. Now they say we're going to have popular sovereignty all of this area on the map. What's left over of the Louisiana Territory, basically, all of this is going to be popular sovereignty. And you're saying, wait, how can you do that? What about the Missouri Compromise? Well, that's exactly what Northerners said. The people in the North were outraged at this. What about the Missouri Compromise? They thought slavery was going to be pinned down in the South and not be allowed to expand. And now you see the possibility of expanding westward and even northward. They are not happy, believe me. They were very unhappy about this Kansas-Nebraska Act, which was proposed by Canandaigua's own Stephen Douglas. Going to use popular sovereignty, and it's going to lead to something called Bleeding Kansas. So you can see here, kind of, we'll talk about this a little more in school, but the spread of the extension of slavery in the United States, how it is spreading from being just a southern thing to possibly expanding almost nationwide. All right, this is showing forcing slavery down the throat of a free soiler being someone who is against slavery, against the spread of slavery. And this is supposed to be Stephen Douglas here with the beard, who is shoving down slavery down the throat of the United States, which is going to bring us to John Brown. So what's going to happen? John Brown is a violent abolitionist and extremist, somebody who believes that God put him on earth for one reason, and that was to end slavery by any means necessary. And he is sick of all these politicians and they're talking and arguing and debating and passing laws that don't do anything and making compromises, and he wants action. So he will take action, as we shall see. This is supposed to be John Brown, a very famous painting of John Brown. So what ends up happening is that of this territory, the first place that's ready to become a state and hold the vote is going to be in Kansas. So Kansas is ready to hold a vote, whether it be a slave state or a free state. They're the first one out of all of this area to vote on the issue. And what's going to happen is that there's going to be a lot of Southerners called the border ruffians, because the ruffians are people who cause trouble, and they're going to cross this boundary into Kansas from Missouri mostly, but from other southern states, and kind of hold an illegal election, and they're going to vote illegally, and they're going to elect a pro-slave government. Meanwhile, people from the north are going to move into the territory temporarily, at least, and vote for a free government. So you have two different governments in Kansas, both claiming to be the legitimate power, both claiming that the election had been stolen from them, and it leads to warfare. There's basically a civil war going on. Hundreds of people get killed out here in Kansas between the forces of the pro-slavery people and the anti-slavery people, I guess. That becomes known as Bleeding Kansas. Now, when John Brown hears about this, he leaves his home in New York State up in the Adirondacks. He travels out to Kansas with his sons, and they form a militia, and then they find the nearest pro-slavery people they can find, and they kill them. And they randomly select them basically because they are pro-slavery people, and they kill them. And it basically is part of this war that's going on, the border war, it's sometimes called, between Kansas and Nebraska. All right, so violence erupts as border ruffians migrate in Kansas to vote on the slave issue. Hundreds are killed. the unofficial start of the war, kind of, and John Brown is the famous example of it. To fill in the notes here, the last part, you can pause and fill in the notes. That's all I'm going to have. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do that one. All right, so you can pause and not listen to me anymore, fill in the notes, and have a great day.